The truth. Ooh. The truth is in the files.
Imagine a terrifying figure lurking in the shadows of ancient Mesopotamia. A demoness whispered to steal the breath from newborns and sow fear among mothers. What if this ancient entity, born from Babylonian myths, still echoes in our folklore today? Join us as we uncover the chilling history of Lilith, the original boogeywoman of childbirth. Welcome to Next File to explore in our channel the Conjuring Files, where we trace the roots of paranormal belief through history, myth, and documented tradition. I'm your guide, and today we're stepping into the torchlit world of ancient Babylon, where the greatest miracle, birth, was also the most dangerous. In Mesopotamia over 4,000 years ago, infant mortality was devastatingly high. Up to half of all newborns didn't survive their first year. And in that darkness, fear took shape. Mothers whispered of a winged woman with long black hair who crept into homes at night, not to harm the mother, but to steal the child's breath as it slept. Her name? Lilith. She wasn't just a ghost story. She was carved into clay amulets hung above cradles. She was invoked in incantations scribbled on cuneiform tablets. Depart, Lilith. Do not touch this child. Archaeologists have found hundreds of these protective charms across Iraq and Syria, proof that this fear was woven into daily life. But where did Lilith come from? Some say she emerged from Sumerian demons like Lilith, female spirits who preyed on women in labor. Others link her to windstorms, seen as chaotic forces that could blow out a baby's fragile life. In a world without germ theory or neonatal care, every cry that fell silent felt like theft, and someone had to be blamed. Critics argue Lilith was never real, just a metaphor for the helplessness of ancient parents facing invisible threats: infection, suffocation, sudden infant death. And they're not wrong. But what's undeniable is her power as a symbol. For millennia, she gave form to the unspeakable dread of losing a child before dawn. And her legacy didn't die with Babylon. Jewish folklore later reimagined her as Adam's first wife, banished for refusing submission, then cursed to haunt nurseries. Medieval Europe painted her as a succubus. Even today, some cultures warn of night spirits that target infants. So was Lilith a demon? Or was she the ancient world's way of naming grief before science gave us answers? Either way, she watched from the cradle's shadow, and mothers prayed she'd stay away. Next, the amulets that were believed to stop her, and the desperate rituals that still echo in modern traditions. Long before she became Adam's rebellious first wife, Lilith was something far older and far more terrifying. Her earliest traces appear not in Hebrew scripture, but in 4,000-year-old Babylonian cuneiform tablets, etched with desperate prayers like, "May Lilith not enter this house. May she not seize the child." These weren't bedtime stories. They were survival rituals, carved in clay by parents who had already buried too many infants. In these texts, Lilith isn't human. She's a wind demon, a Lilith born from storms and chaos. She has wings, owl feet, and hair that rides like snakes. She doesn't walk, she drifts on night breezes, slipping through cracks in mud brick walls to find newborns in their cradles. And her goal isn't destruction, it's theft. She steals breath. She replaces living babies with lifeless husks. She leaves mothers screaming into empty swaddling cloths. But why this specific horror? Because in ancient Mesopotamia, childbirth was a battlefield. Infections, hemorrhage, and sudden infant death claimed lives daily. A baby could cry at dusk and be cold by dawn, with no explanation, no autopsy, no answers. So fear gave the unknown a name, Lilith. She wasn't evil for evil's sake. She was the personification of helplessness. When a mother survived labor only to watch her child stop breathing, it felt like an act of malice, not chance. And so, they fought back with magic. Clay amulets shaped like owls or lions were hung above cribs. Incantations were whispered over sesame oil and river clay. Priests burned juniper to purify the air. Every ritual was a shield against the invisible. Over time, Her form shifted. In Assyrian texts, she becomes a night hag who straddles sleepers, causing nightmares and suffocation, what we now call sleep paralysis. In later Jewish mysticism, she's reimagined as a seductress, but her core remained unchanged. She targets the vulnerable at their most fragile moment. Modern science explains much of what terrified them: SIDS, postpartum infections, respiratory distress. But understanding doesn't erase the grief. And for centuries, Lilith gave that grief a face, so it could be named, fought, and they hoped banished. Because when you can't stop death, you invent a monster you can ward off with a charm. Next, the amulets that mothers swore saved their children, and how archaeologists are still finding them today.
In ancient Babylon, preparing for childbirth wasn't just about clean linens, it was spiritual warfare. Expectant mothers wore clay amulets molded with the faces of protective deities like Pazuzu, the demon king who, ironically, was believed to repel other demons. Above the birthing bed, they hung bronze plaques inscribed with incantations. Lilith, daughter of the wind, flee this house. The child is under divine guard. Even newborns were wrapped in cloth stitched with tiny charms, owl feathers, carnelian beads, and pressed herbs like myrrh, all believed to confuse or repel her. Because Lilith didn't just haunt dreams, she struck in 3 terrifying ways. First, she stole breath. Parents described infants who seemed healthy at dusk, only to be found lifeless at dawn, lips blue, as if their very air had been sucked away. Second, she brought illness. Fevers that spiked overnight, rashes that spread like curses. And third, in the most feared tales, she snatched the baby entirely, leaving behind a changeling, cold, silent, and hollow-eyed. These weren't idle superstitions. They were born from brutal reality. In a world without antibiotics or incubators, a simple cough could kill. A breech birth could end in tragedy. And when it did, the silence that followed needed an enemy. Lilith became that enemy, a being you could fight with ritual, not just mourn with tears. But the psychological toll was immense. Pregnant women lived in quiet dread. Midwives performed nightly rites, burning juniper and chanting until dawn. Fathers buried protective figurines in the courtyard. Every cry from the nursery was met with both joy and fear, because loving a newborn meant risking everything, and believing that somewhere in the dark, Lilith waited, patient and hungry. Modern scholars note that these rituals served a deeper purpose. They gave parents agency. In a time when medicine offered little, magic offered control. Lighting a sacred oil lamp wasn't just tradition, it was defiance. Hanging an amulet wasn't just faith, it was a mother's last line of defense. And in a way, it worked. Not because demons fled, but because the act of protection soothed the soul. When you believe you've done everything possible, grief becomes bearable. So was Lilith real? Not in the way we think of monsters. But as a symbol of every parent's worst fear, she was all too real. Next, how archaeologists are still uncovering these ancient amulets and what they reveal about humanity's oldest battle, protecting the next generation.
Centuries after Babylon fell, Lilith didn't vanish, she evolved. In early Jewish folklore, she reemerged not as a wind demon, but as something far more provocative, Adam's first wife. According to the medieval text The Alphabet of Ben Sira, Lilith was created from the same earth as Adam and refused to submit to him. "Why should I lie beneath you?" she demanded. When he insisted, she spoke the secret name of God, grew wings, and fled Eden. As punishment, she was cursed, doomed to roam the world, preying on infants and barren women. This version transformed her from a mindless predator into a rebellious outcast, a figure of defiance, rage, and tragic consequence. In Kabbalistic writings, she became queen of the night demons, consort to Samhael, mother to legions of spirits. Yet even in these mystical texts, her core threat remained unchanged. She targeted mothers and newborns. Amulets inscribed with the names of angels, Sinoi, Sansonoi, and Samanjaloth, were still hung over cradles to ward her off. The chant persisted, "Lilith, flee. These children are protected. But now, her danger carried moral weight. She wasn't just stealing breath. She was punishing disobedience, embodying the consequences of female autonomy in a patriarchal world. Some scholars argue this shift reflected societal anxieties. As women gained more voice in religious life, Lilith became a cautionary tale, a warning of what happens when women reject their proper place. Yet paradoxically, modern reinterpretations have reclaimed her. Feminist theologians now see Lilith not as a monster, but as a symbol of resistance, the first woman who chose freedom over submission. But even in this empowering light, the shadow remains. Her myth is still tied to loss, infertility, and infant death. Because no matter how her story changed, from Babylonian storm spirit to Edenic rebel, the fear at its heart never faded. The terror of a child's cry that stops in the night, the silence of an empty womb, the helplessness of watching life slip away with no explanation. Lilith adapted to every era, but she always returned to the nursery door. So was she a demon? A metaphor? A mirror for society's deepest fears about women, power, and vulnerability? Perhaps she was all three. Next, why archaeologists are still finding Lilith amulets today, and what they tell us about humanity's unbroken instinct to protect the next generation.
Today, Lilith is everywhere. She haunts horror novels as a seductive demoness. She appears in feminist art as a symbol of unapologetic autonomy. Psychologists cite her as an archetype of the devouring mother, the shadow side of nurturing. Even in pop culture, from supernatural to Lucifer, she's been reborn as queen of darkness, rebel angel, or tragic anti-heroine. But strip away the wings, the rebellion, the Hollywood glamour, and what remains is older than scripture, a mother's fear in the dark. Lilith began not as a myth, but as a response to unbearable reality. In a world where half of all infants died before their first breath, where childbirth could mean death for mother and child alike, humanity needed more than medicine. It needed meaning. And so, they gave their grief a name. They carved her face into clay. They whispered her banishment at midnight. They turned helplessness into ritual. Over millennia, that raw terror transformed. In Babylon, she was a wind demon stealing breath. In medieval Europe, a night hag causing sleep paralysis. In Jewish mysticism, a fallen wife punished for pride. In modern feminism, a symbol of liberation. Yet through every reinvention, one thread endures. She is tied to the vulnerability of women and children. That's why her legacy persists. Not because demons walk among us, but because the fear she embodied never left. We still lose babies to SIDS. We still face infertility, postpartum depression, and the silent guilt of what if I failed? Science gives us answers, but not always comfort. And so, the archetype lingers, not as truth, but as echo. So is Lilith merely a relic of a superstitious past? Or do her ancient anxieties still whisper to us today, in the way we check the baby monitor one more time, in the rituals we keep just in case, in the stories we tell to make sense of loss? Perhaps she was never real, but the fear she represents? That's timeless. If this journey through the origins of history's most enduring night demon unsettled you, enlightened you, or made you see folklore in a new light, do us a favor. Like this video, subscribe to the Conjuring Files, and share it with someone who believes the oldest myths hold the deepest truths. Because sometimes, the scariest monsters aren't under the bed. They're in the silence between a mother's heartbeat and her child's first cry. The truth is in the files.